You think you know why the French Revolution happened? You were told stories about hunger, inequality, and anger. But none of those were the real reason France collapsed. The real reason was a single decision that worked slowly over time. A system no one could oppose, no one could leave, but everyone continued to sink inside. This story begins with a palace, but not with extravagance. It begins with control, and by the end of this story, it drives the richest kingdom in Europe into bankruptcy. Today, I'm not going to tell you a moral fairy tale. I'm going to show you a mechanism. Because if you understand this mechanism, you won't just see the French Revolution more clearly, you'll see the present more clearly too. Every student learns the cause of the French Revolution as a simple story. The people were hungry, the aristocracy was greedy, inequality grew, and eventually the system collapsed. This narrative is clean. It is morally satisfying. But it is historically insufficient because it ignores the mechanism that actually destroyed the French monarchy. Louis XIV did not build Versailles to show off. He built that palace to solve a much more serious political problem. And in solving that problem, he created such a refined, such an attractive, and such a perfectly designed financial mechanism that it took exactly 1 century to bankrupt the richest kingdom in Europe. What triggered the revolution was not bad harvests. It wasn't inequality alone either. The real reason was the first implementation in history of a mandatory luxury spending system. Welcome to the hidden ledger. This is where money, power, and history intersect. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks at first glance. To understand how a palace bankrupted a kingdom, you must first understand what France looked like before Versailles existed. In the 1600s, the French aristocracy was not a ceremonial class. These people were regional power centers. They had their own armies. They had tax collection rights. They exercised near-independent authority over their lands. They lived in their own castles and governed their own households. Their loyalty to the king was often limited to their personal interests. For centuries, this structure produced civil wars, rebellions, and constant threats. Every powerful duke was a potential rival. Louis XIV inherited exactly this kind of kingdom. The nobility could still threaten the crown, and his solution was remarkably simple. He would not fight them, he would buy them. But this purchase was not made with gold or land grants. A far more effective tool was used: proximity to power. In 1682, Louis XIV moved his court to Versailles. What was once a modest hunting lodge was transformed into the most expensive architectural project in European history. But Versailles was not just a palace. It was a system designed to draw in the French nobility and render them powerless. Every duke, every marquis, every count who wanted political relevance was required to be there. And being there came with a price. That price was a level of spending that exceeded the independent income of most nobles. At Versailles, status was no longer measured by land or military strength. Status was measured by visible consumption, clothing, number of servants, carriages, daily entertainment. Everything turned into a competition. And there was no way out of that competition. Anyone who spent less than the others was quickly pushed out of decision-making circles. This is where the true power of the system revealed itself. Political influence required economic submission. Nobles who wanted to remain politically relevant had to spend beyond their means. To do that, they had to borrow. And the more they borrowed, the more dependent they became on royal favor to secure positions that would allow them to service their debts. In other words, the pursuit of influence made them financially fragile, and a debt-ridden aristocracy could no longer oppose the king, because survival now depended on his protection. The numbers reveal the scale of this system clearly. In the 1690s, the annual cost of maintaining a proper lifestyle at Versailles ranged between 50,000 and 100,000 livres. A successful merchant, by contrast, earned around 5,000 livres per year. A single formal outfit could cost 3,000 livres. A minor noble was expected to employ 12 to 15 servants, a duke more than 30. Carriages, horses, gambling expenses, gifts, tips, each seemed reasonable on its own. Together, they were devastating. The noble faced two choices: remain in the system by taking on debt, or retreat to the provinces and lose influence. Most chose debt. Within one generation, the French aristocracy ceased to be an independent power. It became a magnificent but indebted class. But the system didn't trap only the nobility. It pulled in the king as well. Because once prestige competition began, stepping back meant signaling weakness. Louis XIV understood this very well. Reducing court spending would signal that France's power was declining, and that signal would be an invitation to European rivals. So spending increased, ceremonies expanded, expectations rose. Versailles became a small city, but a city that produced nothing and only consumed. The palace's annual costs absorbed roughly 25% of total state revenue. This was unsustainable, but it could not be reduced. This is where the death spiral began. Each year, higher spending became necessary to preserve status. Each expense forced the next. The system turned into an economic parasite. By the 1750s, the picture was clear. State debt was growing. Interest payments consumed most of the revenue. But reform was impossible, because the very system that needed reform was preventing it. Versailles could not be abandoned. But it could not be financed either. And eventually, the bills came due. The French Revolution did not emerge from philosophical awakening, but from fiscal collapse. The Estates General was convened not for democracy, but to solve a budget deficit. The rest is history. But this story did not remain in the past. The same mechanism is still operating today. It simply wears different clothes. Corporate prestige spending, lifestyle inflation, state spectacles, borrowing for status. The mathematics are the same. The psychology is the same. Versailles no longer exists. But the mindset that built it still does. If you like the video, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious. And remember, history does not repeat itself exactly, but if you fail to understand it, the outcome does not change. You don't lose because you don't know. You lose because you don't learn.